It is. I am recording.
You're live.
We are live, or we are recording, and then we'll be live.
Yes.
Alrighty, then welcome back to
Or
the Literal
undead.
Rascals. Woo, I'm so happy to see everyone. We are knee deep into the witch's quest to win the heart of Ariman the Awful. And right now, they are getting ready to perform their magic to see who performs the darkest magic. So, on that note, who goes first
Ladies
and then
first.
thereafter?
I don't
Ladies
mind
first.
I
starting.
think we want to do men first this time.
Oh yeah, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we should do age before beauty. Just kidding. I'm probably the oldest one.
Oh.
All
All right, in that case, I'll go first.
I'll go after Bob.
right.
Yeah,
Uh,
Drew.
I'll bat the male cleanup.
All right. So, you're third. So, Melanie, you want to
Sure.
go fourth?
Yeah.
And then I'm last, fifth.
Okay.
So, I'm after Melanie.
All right.
Y'all remember that? Well, no, you don't have to remember that. Just remember where you go because you know I'm awful about that. We already know that. Okay, anyway, so when you are ready, Bob, begin.
7. The news that the witches were to camp hit Mr. Ledbetter extremely hard. Once before he came to work for Ariman, he had taken a camping holiday in the south of France. He could remember a huge ironmonger's daughter from Berlin who had lost her way back to her tent at night and fallen like a felled ox across his guy ropes. He could remember an old Greek lady cutting her toenails into the sinks for washing up, and 3 sunburnt Italian men who had stumped up and down with blaring transistors clamped to their oiled stomachs. He remembered the dead toad caught in the slatted floor of the shower block and the hairy housewife from Luxembourg who had sat on the steps of her caravan shaving her legs. And when he remembered that these were ordinary people, the thought of what the witches would make of camping made him groan aloud. Oh, sometimes I don't know what I've done
Okay.
to deserve it.
To deserve it. Lester, honestly, I don't, he said to the ogre. But of course, he went out, good secretary that he was, and ordered everything he could think of tents and sleeping bags and folding chairs, and had the stuff set up to Darkington. Then he borrowed the manager's top hat and wrote the numbers 1 to 7 on bits of paper and put them inside the hat and left it on the piano stool in the ballroom, ready for the witches to draw lots on the following day for their place in the contest. Perhaps Madame Olympia would care to draw first, he suggested, when he had gathered them together after breakfast. So the enchantress, dragging her aardvark by his rhinestone collar, came forward and put her hand into the hat. Is this some sort of joke? She said disdainfully, putting the thing she had just pulled out onto the piano stool. It was an egg. There was only the shortest of pauses, and then it began. That is an egg laid by my chicken, said Nancy Shouter. Oh, no, it isn't. That is an egg laid by my chicken. I could tell that egg anywhere. The other witches came closer. There is always.
Okay.
Excitement when a familiar lays an egg. There could so easily be a small dragon inside, or a dark stain, which could be trained to grow up into a friend. Anything. And for once, they could see what the Shouter twins were quarreling about. Mr. Ledbetter sighed. He did so want to get on with the drawing lots. Ethel Feedbag now stepped forward. Working at the egg packing station, she was reckoned to be an expert. The egg, he pronounced, be simply an egg. This, of course, set the Shouters off again. How dare you suggest that my chicken could lay an ordinary egg? Not your chicken, my children. Ethel shrugged. Nancy Shouter picked up the egg. Nora Shouter tried to pull it away from her. The next second, they were all peering down at the mess of yellow yolk, transparent white, and bits of shell splooshed across the carpet. Ethel was perfectly right. Whichever of their chickens had laid it, the thing was simply an egg. When at last they got around to drawing lots, it worked out like this. Mabel Rack was number 1, which meant that she would be the first to do her trick. Ethel Feedbag was number 2, and the Shouter twins had drawn 3 and 4.
Okay.
Mother Bloodwort was number 5, and Madame Olympia was number 6. And the witch who would do her trick last on the actual night of Halloween, and who had drawn number 7, was Belladonna. Fine Halloween that'll be, sneered Nancy Shouter. Blinking nightingales all over the place, and angels singing Hallelujah chorus. I shouldn't wonder. Once those words would have hurt Belladonna badly, but not now. Only half an hour earlier, with Rover and Terence, she had turned an ashtray in her bedroom into a hideous, grinning skull. There was only one more thing for the witches to do, and in a way, it was the most important of all. They had to decide on which piece of magic they were going to do and make lists of all the things they needed for it so that they could be got ready and waiting for them at the hall. All the other witches seemed to know. You could hear them plotting and whispering and hiding bits of paper from each other all over the hotel, but not Belladonna. Being black needs a lot of practice and a completely different way of thinking to being white. And when she tried to imagine a trick foul and vicious enough to please Ariman, her mind just went completely blank. Oh, Terence, I wish I knew what to do, she said to the little boy who was sitting beside her on the bed.
Okay. Even in the 2 days since he had left the home, Terence seemed to have changed. His mud-colored eyes had grown bright and eager. His hair was no longer plastered to his head, but bounced with life. And he wore spectacles at quite a jaunty angle on the end of his nose. Happiness is almost as good as magic for altering a person's. I suppose Mabel Rat will do some watery, fishy kind of trick, Madonna went on. And Ethel Feedbag's sure to do something country-ish, and Madame Olympia. But the thought of Madame Olympia's trick was horrible in a special sort of way, and Belladonna left her sentence unfinished. She picked up the mirror. Ariman was playing solitaire. Not cheating exactly, but sometimes rearranging the cards a little. The look on his dark, brooding face, the white hair in his curse curl, made her heart turn over. She was just going to put the mirror down again when a gray, wavering shape passed over its surface, and she saw Ariman look up eagerly. "Is that Sir Simon?" asked Terence. And it was his first sight of the wicked spectre. Belladonna nodded. "He's his special friend." Why is he banging his forehead like that?" Terence wanted to know. "It's guilt, because he killed all his wives. It makes okay."
Plashing noise, Lester says, but we can't hear it because the mirror's silent. Is that all he does? Terence asked. Can't he speak or anything? Belladonna shook her head. You've got to remember, he's been dead for 400 years. Whatever it is people speak with must have got very withered up by now. He sighed. It must be so lonely for Ariman, having a friend who can't say anything. I mean, a plashing sound is not the same. Suddenly, Terence gave a little cry.
Hey!
Belladonna saw that behind his spectacles, his bright, mud-colored eyes were positively sparkling with excitement. Belladonna, I've had a marvelous idea. For your trick, why don't you raise Sir Simon? Bring him back to life. Belladonna stared at him. Terence, I couldn't. Not possibly. That's the darkest magic in the world. Witches didn't just get burnt at the stake for that. They got hung and drawn and quartered and rolled up into little balls of dung. Terence didn't seem to think this mattered. But you want to be dark, don't you? What's the point of being just a little bit dark? If you're going to win, surely you have to do the most awful thing there is. Yes, but I'd never do it. Ariman hasn't been able to do it.
And Lester says he's tried and tried and tried. Ariman hasn't got Rover, said Terence. Belladonna was silent. The little boy's faith in his worm was somehow catching. Oh, Terence, do you really think I could? Of course you could. And think how happy you'd be making Ariman. That's what you want when you love someone, isn't it? To make them happy? So he had guessed her secret. Yes, Belladonna said quietly. That's what you want. She got up and went over to the wooden box that Terence had fitted out for Rover to live in when he wasn't in the matchbox in his pocket. Just to know that the worm was there, cradled deep in layers of damp, rich earth, made her feel at once more evil, more wicked, and more dark. What shall I put on my list then? There are awful things you need for necromancy. Warm sheep's blood, and I think hits and things. Terence considered, I wouldn't bother with all that, he said. I think all that stuff's just for people who haven't got Rover. I reckon you've just got to think black. So Belladonna got a sheet of hotel notepaper out of the bureau and wrote, "Witch number 7, nothing."
Okay.
And went downstairs to give to the secretary and the ogre. Mr. Ledbetter had just finished reading the list handed in by the other 6 witches, after which he had done something most unusual. He sat down. Not even the pain as his stump grated against the seat could keep him on his feet. He had expected the witches to want a few things like crucibles or thrucibles, whatever they were, and a bit of wax for making images, perhaps a spot of moonswort or mercury, some kind of thing, but no, the witches had really gone to town. 7 princesses, cried Mr. Ledbetter, holding up a list that the chambermaid had written out for witch number 5. What does she think I am? Lester pulled skillfully at the handle of the saber sticking from his mouth and drew it from his gullet. They'll have to go up to the hall, he said, coming to stand behind the secretary. We'll get the easy stuff, but the old man will have to magic up the rest on the day. I'm not going to Turnbull and Bootles to ask for 7 princesses of the blood royal, nor are you. Mr. Ledbetter nodded. Much as he had hated failing Ariman, he could see that Lester was right. It was just then that Belladonna knocked and slipped in quietly with her list.
Okay.
Dear girl, said Mr. Ledbetter, when he'd read it, she's never any trouble. But secretly, the ogre and the secretary were anxious and dismayed. Did it mean that Belladonna had gone white again? That she wasn't even going to try? What kind of magic could she do with nothing? Meanwhile, at Darkington Hall, the visiting judges had arrived. When the competition had first been suggested, Ariman had thought of having a whole panel of judges, as they do for the Miss World contest or the Olympic Games. But people who really knew about magic were getting hard to find. And anyway, now that he had seen some of the witches, Ariman felt so gloomy that he just wanted to get everything over in the simplest way possible. He had written to a lady called the Hag of the Dribble to ask if she could come and be a judge, but she hadn't answered. Probably there wasn't any writing paper in Dribble. And what he was left with was an extremely old, rather frail ghoul named Henry Sniveler, and a genie called Mr. Chatterjee. Mr. Chatterjee, like most genies, lived in a bottle out of which he swooshed if someone had the right words and remembered to unscrew the top. He was an Indian genie and felt the cold so dreadfully that mostly he liked to stay inside the bottle and talk through the glass.
As his accent was rather strong, this made it difficult to understand him. But he was a very fine judge of magic, having lived so long in the East, where they do a lot of interesting things like sending people up on flying carpets and then bringing them down suddenly so that their behinds become impaled on spikes. Mr. Sniveler was a very different sort of person, a dark-faced, silent ghoul who lived behind a slaughterhouse in a satanic northern town and spent the night foraging in dustbins for unspeakable blood-red things, some of which he ate and some of which he collected. Ghouls are not particularly good at magic, but there is nothing darker, gloomier, or more evil than a ghoul, and Ariman knew that he had been very lucky to get him. So now, the three of them sat at the dinner around the carved oak table in the great hall, where the firelight flickered, the ravens croaked in the rafters, and on a... Okay?
Rud, the weary wizard watcher, rested its head. Ariman was in low spirits. The witches were due to arrive in a couple of days, and kind Mr. Chatterjee, who was dining inside his bottle because of the drafts, was doing his best to cheer him up. "Oh, my goodness, it will not be so bad, I think. You have a wife?" he said in his soft, sing-song voice, sucking up a piece of spaghetti which Ariman had dropped in for him. Although tiny, he was most beautifully dressed in a white turban and a scarlet tunic frogged with gold. The ghoul did not see it like that. He said, and presently, when he had swallowed a fish finger, Ariman was just beginning to explain about the contest and how it should be judged, when there was the usual plashing and moaning, and Sir Simon appeared through the tapestry and thrust his pale and ghastly face at Ariman. "You see," said the wizard gloomingly, "he's trying to warn me. 7 times he's been married, and each time his wife drove him to murder. Quite simply drove him." "Oh, dearie me," said Mr. Chatterjee, very much upset. "How has he been murdering so many, please?" Ariman shrugged. "The usual methods, I suppose. Drowning, stabbing, strangulation, that kind of thing." "Ah, then it is good he is only a ghost," said the little genie. "Or your new wife will perhaps be number 8.
Okay.
Ariman threw him a sharp look from beneath his devilish eyebrows. "It's only his own wives he kills," he said. But for a while he stared abstractedly into the fire as though turning a new and important idea over in his mind. "Well now, gentlemen," he said at last, "to business. I thought each witch should be given 10 points, 2 for darkness, 2 for power, 2 for presentation." There was a swoosh, and Mr. Chatterjee came out of his bottle, growing almost to normal size as he did. Like most genies, he was very serious about his work, and for the next hour, while the shadows lengthened and the wizard watchers slept, the judges of the Miss Witch of Toadcaster contest bent over their task.
Okay.
Chapter 8. The witches' camping wasn't as bad as Mr. Ledbetter had thought it would be. It was worse. Not that there was anything wrong with the campsite. The campsite was very nice. Mr. Ledbetter had ordered a caravan for Mother Bloodwort, who had seemed to him too old to do well under canvas and tents and a toilet block with showers and absolutely the latest kind of chemical loo. But the witches hadn't been in the West Meadow for 24 hours before pandemonium set in. For a start, Mother Bloodwort never got into her caravan at all. Madame Olympia nudged straight away, but no one knew how, and sat inside with the aardvark despising the other witches and refusing to take her turn at any of the chores. Nancy and Nora Shrouder spent the first night quarreling about which of them
had the better camp bed and ended by sticking penknives into each other's air mattresses. Ethel feedback the pig is escaped from its pen and crashed into Mother Bloodwood's tent, sending the old witch flying just as she was trying to fix a moon-blood poultice under her nightdress. And Mabel Rax insisted on using a cooking cauldron to give Doris a bubble bath, which made the breakfast porridge taste very strange indeed. It was Belladonna, of course, who was left to fetch the water and do the cooking and the washing up. And however hard she tried to please everybody, rashing cod's eyes for Mabel Whack and roasting squashed hedgehog on hot bricks for Ethel Feedbag, she got nothing but grumbles and sneers for her pains. And Belladonna had her own troubles. Mr. Ledbetter and the ogre were back in their old rooms up at the hall, and Terence was supposed to be Mr. Ledbetter's nephew. He had been given a little room beside the secretaries in the servants' wing. This meant that Rover, too, was far away at the end of the long drive, sleeping in his wooden box under Terence's window. And with her familiar out of reach, Belladonna's old trouble was coming back, and coming back badly. The very first morning she had woken to find that her sleeping bag had come out in a rash of passion flowers, great pollen-loaded things that tickled admonishingly.
And made her sneeze. And when she opened the flap of her tent, she found 6 twitch-eared, bright-eyed baby rabbits waiting for her, their paws in the air. I'm not a white witch now, you know, she said crossly. But of course she let them in and conjured up a patch of lettuce for them out of her ground sheet. And it was clear to everybody that they were to stay. But if life was hard on the camping site in the West Meadow, it wasn't exactly easy at the hall. Mr. Sniveler, the ghoul, who was sleeping in the tapestry room, found it difficult to break the habit of years and spent the night scooping fungus off the ceiling walls and filching raw mice from the refrigerator and taking them to bed. This meant that he was usually very tired during the day and fell asleep all over the place, waking up suddenly to say things like, "Blood!" or "Time!" which made it difficult to carry on a sensible conversation. Poor Mr. Chatterjee had caught a cold and sat inside his bottle sneezing miserably so that the glass twisted up and he couldn't see out. As for Ariman, well, as Lester said, anyone would think he was going to have his bloomin' head chopped up instead of getting hitched the way he's carrying on. In the bustle and fuss that led up to the start of the competition, Terence turned out to be worth his weight in gold. He ran errands, found the wizards
socks, removed the bits of sticking plaster with scabs on them from Mr. Sniveler's bed, and stuffed Mr. Chatterjee's bottle with paper tissue so that the little genie could blow his swollen nose. And everything he did happily and with delight, because Darkington, with its devilish maze and stinking laboratory and ghastly zoo, seemed to him the most enchanting place in the whole world. But what Terence did, whenever he could be spared, was to study Sir Simon Montpelier, and quite soon he knew as much about the wicked wife-slayer as Ariman himself. He learnt that the spectre usually appeared first in the broom cupboard, where he limbered up with a couple of groans, half a dozen eerie thumps, and a wail or two, before settling into the serious business of smiting his forehead with a plashing sound. Then, still plashing for all he was worth, the unhappy phantom would set off through the laundry room, up the stairs to the library, pass through a couple of bookcases and a stuffed bison, and end up in the great hall, popping out through a tapestry of a man being stuck full of arrows while being burnt at the stake, and ruining the appetite of whoever was at dinner. "You'll see," said Terence to Belladonna, who was stirring the witch's supper over the campfire. "He'll be absolutely terrific when he's raised. When you get close to him, his face is all sort of loathsome and ruined looking."
Okay.
When he bursts through the wall alive, it'll be a sensation. Oh, Terence, I do hope so, said Belladonna. The baby rabbits hadn't gone, nor had the passion flowers, and the tree behind her tent was bearing golden pears. Tell me, she went on, how is he? Is he still so sad? She meant Ariman, of course. The great magician was seldom from her mind. Well, he is a bit, but you've got to remember that he's never seen you and that he doesn't know you're going to win. No, said Belladonna, he certainly doesn't know that. But already she felt blacker and more hopeful. It was always like that when Terence came. And so at last, after all the preparations and the fuss, the first day of the contest dawned. Mabel Rack, witch number one, had got up early and stood for 2 hours under the shower so that her legs would not dry out on her big day. She had dressed with care, fastening the sea slug brooch beneath her gown, but she was not nervous. Owing to Miss Rack having been a mermaid, Mabel was 1/4 fish and is well known. Fishes are cold-blooded and never get excited. As everyone had expected, Mabel had decided to do.
Okay.
Her trick by the sea. The place she had chosen was called the Devil's Cauldron, a sandy bay flanked by brooding granite cliffs and strewn with jagged rocks, to which dark seaweed slimily clung. Backing the sand was a strip of turf, and it was here, at the trestle table which Lester had dragged out for them, that the judges sat. Ariman the Awful, wearing his robe with the constellations on it, was in the middle. Mr. Chatterjee, inside the bottle on account of the nippy breeze, was on the magician's left, and on the right, pale and exhausted after a night of hideous wandering, dropped Mr. Sniffler. The other witches gowned and masked so that Armand couldn't catch even an accidental glimpse of them, were bundled behind a clump of gorse busses. All except Madame Olympia, who had stayed snootily inside her caravan. Ariman now got up to make a speech. He declared that Miss Witch of Toadcaster contest opened and welcomed all the competitors. He reminded them of the rules. Any witch practicing black magic on another witch or her familiars would be disqualified. The competitors must now show their faces, and the judge's decision was final. Then he sat down, and Mr. Ledbetter, shouting through a megaphone like a film director, said, "Witch number one, step forward." There was clapping from the other witches, and from other villages who had come up the cliff's path.
Okay.
And Mabel emerged from behind the grouse bushes. Only the lower part of her face showed beneath the mask, but it was enough to make Ariman hope frantically that she was going to go to the sea in a sieve and drown. "Present your list," ordered Mr. Ledbetter, and Mabel went up to the judge's table with her piece of paper. In the neat hand of a practiced shopkeeper, Mabel had written, 1 gong, loud, 2 golden rings, 3, a drowned sailor. "The manager of the hotel was kind enough to lend us his gong," said Mr. Ledbetter, "and we got the golden rings from Woolsworth. But there is the matter of the drowned soldier." Said Ariman, looking rather sick. "There is a place called Davy Jones' Locker under the sea, where the bodies of drowned soldiers are supposed to be kept. But he had never fancied it. Messy, it sounded, as though things would have been nibbled at, and of all things, Armand hated a mess. Then he had an idea and smiled. 'Hand me my wand, Ledbetter,' he said, and shut his eyes. The next second, a large gray skeleton stuck together with bits of wire swirled through the air and landed at the sea witch's feet.
Okay. I wanted a fresh one, complained Mrs. Rat. One with some meat on it. It's for bait. If witch number 1 is not satisfied, snapped Ariman, fire shooting from her nostrils, she may withdraw from the contest. All right, said Mabel sulkily. But he's a very funny sheep. This was certainly true. The skeleton had, in fact, belonged to the biology lab of a large comprehensive school in the Midlands, and the poor gentleman hadn't exactly been a sailor, but an undertaker who liked messing about in boats and had fallen in the year 1892 into the Shropshire Union Canal. Owing to the carelessness of the children, and was that owing to the carelessness of the children and the fact that the biology master was the kind who couldn't keep order, the skeleton had gotten badly jumbled. Oh my goodness. The skull was back to front, 3 finger bones were missing, and for some reason he seemed to have had 3 thighs.
Oh, yeah.
Announce the trick you'll be performing, Mr. Ledbetter shouted through his megaphone. Mabel Rack turned to face the judges. She had taken Doris out of her bucket and thrown the familiar's tentacles carelessly around her shoulders like a mink stole, while she held the animal's round body under her arms, squeezing with power and darkness like someone playing the bagpipes. Then she spoke. Okay.
I shall call forth the Kraken from the deep, 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 she said. There was a stunned silence. The Kraken, that dread and dangerous monster that has lain since the dawn of time beneath the surface of the sea, dragging ships to their doom, creating by its lightest movement tidal waves that could drown cities. "Oh, Terence," whispered Belladonna, "I'm scared, aren't you? Fancy Mabel Rack being able to do that!" And indeed, all the onlookers were a little bit ashamed. They had never taken the fishy witch too seriously, and now even Ariman the Awful was impressed. "Instruct witch number 1 to proceed," he said. Mabel Rack stepped forward to the edge of the ocean. The sea witch was no slouch, and she had prepared her act with care. She would begin by peppering the sea with golden rings to fetch up the underwater spirits, who were known to be extremely fond of jewelry, and would then come and help her when she called them to her aid. As for the drowned sailor, he was meant to lure the Kraken from his lair, and so make it easier for the spirits to find him. She put Doris back in her bucket and threw the rings, one by one, into the foam. Then she raised her arms, and the skeleton of the undertaker, who had liked messing about in boats,
rose slowly up in the air, turned a somersault, and tumbled into the waves. "Levitation," said Ariman. "Quite neat. Give her a mark for that, don't you think?" The thought of seeing a Kraken had quite cheered him up. Next, Mabel picked up the gong and thumped it with a resounding wallop. It sent the seabirds flying up in terror. Then, mighty spirits of the deep, pray you waken from your sleep. Come as fast as you are able. Come and help your sister Mabel. Chanted Miss Rack. She had decided to go into poetry for the contest. This may have been a mistake. Some witches have a feeling for poetry, some haven't. Miss Rack hadn't. From thunderous reef and mighty grot, the dreaded Kraken must be got. "What's a grot?" whispered Mother Blowmort petitionally from behind the gorse bushes. "It's short for grotto, I think," Belladonna whispered back. "Sort of a cave," though she knew that she
had no chance of winning now. She could do anything. She could do anything more terrible than call up a kraken. She was looking at Mrs. Whack with shining eyes. There just wasn't a mean streak anywhere in Belladonna. The pause which followed was an anxious one. Even Ariman wondered if he had been hasty. Would he be flooding? Whirlpools? Cannibalism? There are too many stories of witches summoning up evil forces which they cannot control. The pause lengthened. The ghoul, unable to take the strain, dropped off to sleep. And until the wind soughed, the gray sea foamed and boiled against the rocks. But now there was a change. The sky seemed to darken. The white crests of the waves died away to leave a creeping, wrinkled skin of water. The water dropped. The seabirds fell silent. What came next was a strange heaping up of the water onto a mound that grew and grew and became a huge tower topped with foam. And now the tower reared upward, bent, and turned to face a great tunnel of boiling, churning water toward the shore. The witches huddled together. Terrence's hand crept into Belladonna's and the judge's at the judge's table. Ariman reached for the genie bottle and screwed on the top.
Just in time, the towering wave had landed with a thunderous crash upon the sand, and when the foam and turmoil had died down, the onlookers, Mrs. Rack had called on the spirits of the deep to help her find the kraken, and it was perhaps natural that these should be mermaids. But the four ladies who now sat on the beach were fleshy and no longer young, and they seemed to be rather pointlessly clutching a large black handbag, each of them holding on to it with a pudgy arm. The rings, which Mrs. Rack had sent to them, glistening on their fingers, and their lower halves were sensibly covered in tail cozies of knitted bladder-wrack. But all of them were topless, and Ariman had already flinched and closed his eyes. Mrs. Rack stepped closer, and her mouth opened in horror. "Septic shutterfish!" she swore under her breath. And indeed, it was the most appalling luck. Of all the mermaids in the ocean, she had managed to call up her mother's 4 unmarried sisters. Aunt Edna, Aunt Gwendolyn, Aunt Phoebe, and Aunt Jane. For a moment, Mabel panicked. There is probably nothing less black or magical in the whole world than a person's aunt. Then he remembered that the top half of her face was covered by a mask. With luck, she would not be recognized. There had been a bit of split.
Okay, the family when her mother had opted for lens. So disgusting her voice as well as she could, she began. "Summon here, I bid thee hearken. You have been to fetch the kraken. Search the corners of the ocean." She broke off, trying to find a rhyme for ocean, and also wondering whether an ocean really had corners. But she needn't have bothered because all 4 of her aunts were talking at once. Talking no notice of each other or of her. Guys, dear! We're so glad you called. We've been worried sick. Not knowing what to do for the best, you see. What that oil rig went through his mother's head. Skull shattered, not a hope or soul. "Oh, it's meant," I said to Edna. "Didn't I, dear?" "Phoebe, you said? Someone knows that's right. What's right?" The aunt who had just spoken broke off, edged closer, peered at Mabel Rack. "Funny, I'd swear I'd seen you before. Those nostrils. Mouth. Still clutching their handbag, the mermaids waddled toward her on their tails. Okay.
It can't be, of course. But isn't she the spit of poor Agatha? The spit?
Echoed Aunt Jane. Mabel Rack retreated backwards, but it was too late.
It must be Agatha's little girl, the one she had the fishmonger after the operation. It is her, I'm sure. Mabel, wasn't she called? Mabel, dear little Mabel.
Terribly excited, the aunts dropped their handbag at last and surrounded their niece with a great flopping of tails and waving of pink plump arms.
Stop it!
That's just not
Hissed
right.
Mabel furiously.
It's a competition! Kick away! And speak in verse! You're disgracing me!
There was a moment of outraged silence while Mabel continued to glare angrily at her relations. It was a silly thing for her to do. Mermaids are famous for being touchy, and so, of course, are maiden aunts. Oh, very well, said Aunt Edna haughtily. We know when we aren't wanted, don't we?
It was you that called us, you know. Such airs, just because a father had legs in a shop.
As they spoke, the mermaids began to waddle huffily away, speaking over their shoulders as they went.
We were going to stay and give you a few hints, but we won't bother now.
Okay.
Don't blame us if you don't know how much Steve C. squirt to give. Speak in verse indeed, and with the last offended sniff, the four mermaids dived back into the water and were gone. Stop, shouted the desperate Miss Rack. Come back, you've left your handbag. It was a dreadful moment. The mermaids had gone, the mighty kraken still slumbered beneath the deep, and on the face of Ariman the Awful was a look that froze the marrow in one's bones. And now this handbag. Only was it a handbag? For even as they watched, the object on the sand seemed to kind of give a judder. Next, it puffed itself out into a round, smooth dome like the top of a tadpole or of a small and very squidgy flying saucer. In the middle of this dome, two slits now appeared, and a pair of shining, tear-filled, sky-blue eyes stared upward at Miss Rack. Oh my God, said Lester, with whom the penny had already dropped. The thing now went into a kind of private struggle, and from its round, dark blank image of a body there appeared one by one 8 wavery, wobbly legs, each ending in a blob-shaped foot. Peering closer, the onlookers could see, at the rim of the saucer, a round
hole, from whose reddened edges the little finger bone of the undertaker sadly hung. Aunt Jane had given it to him to help him with his teething. Even with the evidence there before their eyes, no one could quite believe it. They watched in silence as the handbag raised itself once more, tottering a few pathetic steps, and fell in a despairing, quivering heap before Miss Rack. "Mummy," it said in a pious voice. "Mummy." The sea witch stepped back in disgust. Terence clung tightly to Belladonna to stop her running forward. The ghoul woke suddenly and said, "Spell!" And Ariman the Awful rose from the seat. "What in the name of devilry and darkness is that thing?" he thundered. He knew, of course, he could say a lot about Ariman, but not that he was thick. "That, sir," said the ogre, "is a kraken. A baby kraken. A very young baby kraken indeed." Hearing voices, feeling himself unwanted by the very witch who had called him forth from the sea, the kraken, his eyes, his whole body streaming with tears, now began to totter wetly to the table and judges sat. 3 times he fell, his legs hopelessly knotted, and 3 times he rose again, leaving each time a gustling pool of water, until he reached the chair of Ariman the Awful, the Wizard of the North.
Okay.
"Daddy," the kraken said the kraken, rolling his anguished eyes upward, and again, Daddy? Everybody waited. Ariman looked downward and shuddered. Take it away, Lester. Remove it. Throw it back into the sea. The ogre did not move. You heard me, Lester. It's dribbling on my feet. Sir, said the ogre, that kraken is an orphan. Its mother had an oil rig through her head. It'll be 2,000 years before that kraken is old enough to swallow as much as a canoe. If you throw it back now, it will die. So, said Ariman nastily. Over by the grouse bush, Belladonna closed her eyes and prayed. Mr. Chatterjee tried to swoosh out of his bottle, hit his head on the screw top, and fell back, his turban over his dark, kind face. Dad, said the kraken, his voice only a whisper now, and raised from the top of his body a tiny, trembling, and hopeless-looking tail. Oh, plague on the lot of you, cursed Ariman, and scooping up the kraken, which immediately began to squeak and giggle because it was extremely ticklish, the furious magician left the judge's table and strode away down the hall.
Okay. Chapter 9. Chapter 9. I said chapter 9. Okay. Mabel's marks were announced that night. She had scored 4 out of a possible 10, a low mark, and one that would have been lower. Okay, y'all, Mabel's marks. Okay, Mabel's marks were announced that night. She had scored 4 out of a possible 10, a low mark, and one that would have been lower if Ariman had had his way. But as kind as Mr. Chatterjee pointed out, she had called up the kraken from the deep, and it wasn't her fault that the thing had turned out the way it had. Well, the low score means all the other witches, and echo feedback, whose turn came on the following day, was heard alerting and roistering around the campfire until long after midnight, hiccuping over her parsnip wine and falling asleep with her head on her pig and her wellies dangerously close to the embers. Belladonna, of course, couldn't help feeling a bit sorry for Mabel, who had retired happily into her sleeping
bag with wet towels round her legs. But Terence didn't pretend to be anything but pleased.
You'll see, Belladonna. You'll win. You're bound to.
He had brought Rover down earlier, and just by touching the slender, peaceful body of her familiar, Belladonna had been able to turn the passion flowers into bloodshot eyeballs and the golden pears into thumbscrews. She'd left the baby rabbits because, as she said to Terence, it was knowing that she could turn them into decayed appendixes that was important.
How is, he?
She asked now. Terence said that Ariman was a little bit upset. He could have said more, but he knew that Belladonna was in love, and that nothing hurts people more than to think that someone they love is not altogether perfect. In fact, Ariman had been creating like nobody's business on account of the kraken. Absolutely nothing could persuade the kraken that Ariman was not his father, and the magician had had to change his shoes 3 times between tea and supper because the thing insisted on sitting on his feet. Krakens made their own wetness from the inside and can breathe in air as well as in water, so there was nothing to stop the dreaded denizen of the deep from trying to climb onto Ariman's lap or shedding tears all over his trousers, and the great man was taking it very badly.
Okay.
Oh, why didn't the new wizard cometh? He raged at dinner. I have been spared all this. Lester, take it away. It's you he wants, sir, said the ogre reproachfully. But he scooped up the kraken and put him in a soup tureen. For what with Sir Simon welling in the wainscot, Mr. Chatterjee seizing in his bottle, and the gold dribbling raw liver from his mouth, he did feel that perhaps his master had had enough. The following morning, they were up early to see what which number two was going to do. Ethel had chosen to perform her trick in a grassy and very beautiful hollow in which, beside a bubbling brook, there grew an oak, an ash, and a thorn. These three trees have, since the beginning of time, been special trees. Even separately, they are special, but when they grow together, well, anything can happen in a place like that. Which number two? Step forward, shouted Mr. Ledbetter, and Ethel, still wearing beneath her gown the three bouldering jerseys she'd slept in, lurched out from behind a rock, pushing a wheelbarrow and calling to her huge and mucky pig. Hand in your list, Mr. Ledbetter ordered, and Ethel walked over to the judge's table, which Lester had set out on a level patch of grass, and put down a crumpled piece of paper in front of Ariman.
Okay.
The magician read it and passed a weary hand across his forehead. Which number two wanted? A man, a woman, and a child. More fuss, he muttered, and then fetch the telephone directory. So Terence ran up to the hall and came back with the Toadcaster, and district directory. And Ariman closed his eyes, flicked the pages, and stubbed his fingers down on what turned out to be the bees. It is not difficult to work a telephone directory. Any wizard worth his salt can do it. You just press your fingers down hard on the telephone number, say the right spells, and immediately you can see in your mind's eye the family that lives at the address. After that, summoning them by levitation is just child's play. Now, Ariman ignored a Colonel Benningbotter sitting pinkily at the table at Toadcaster 5930, passed over the Bender sisters doing keep fit exercises at 2378, and focused in on the Bixnell family at Toadcaster 9549. Exactly what he was looking for. Mr. and Mr. Bixnell and their daughter Linda were sitting at breakfast in their small semi at 187 Archaea Avenue. Mrs. Bixnell was still in her hairnet and curlers. Linda was dressed for school. Linda was fat and her mother was thin. Linda was 8 years old and her mother was 35. But what they both liked...
Tammy, if she wanted to sleep over tonight?
Best was being nasty to Linda's father,
Fine with me, yo.
Mr. Bicknell, and they were doing it now.
Why did you put on that stupid shirt? Said Mrs. Bicknell. It makes you look like an ostrich with that croup. Your hair might getting awful thin on top, Daddy.
I ran into Mike.
You'll be bald soon.
He told me.
Oh, it's Kathy.
Won't you look silly when you're bald? Said Linda. Mrs. Pierce across the road is getting a new washing machine. I suppose you know I've had my washing machine for 3 years.
I don't know.
Davina's daddy's buying her a doll that can clean its own teeth. Why don't you buy me a doll like that?
Mr. Bicknell, a small, rather stooped man with a thin, tired face and a lined forehead, just went on quietly eating his cornflakes. He worked hard all day in his grocer shop, helping the people he served to make their money go further. And when he came home at night, he went on helping. He helped his wife with the washing up and fixed shelves and dug the garden. But whatever he did, it made no difference. His wife and his daughter just nagged and nagged and nagged.
You didn't clean the brigadier's cage out properly, said Mrs. Bicknell, piling her throat with marmalade. There's birdseed stuck on the corner. Davina said being a grocer's is silly, Only silly people are grocers, Davina said.
And I wish that just for once you'd... But at this point, the windows began to rattle violently. Then they both opened, and the room was filled with whirling and roaring wind, which lifted Mr. and Bignall away. Roaring, and it lifted Mr. and Mrs. Bignall away, and their daughter Linda, and took them up and out of the house, up and away, to land in what seemed to be just a moment in time at Ethel Feedbag's feet. The country witch, she peered at them and nodded. Then she stuck her boot under the shoulder, twitching Mrs. Bignall and the howling and kicking Linda, and turned them over on their backs. There was no need to turn over Mr. Bignall, who already lay quietly looking upward at the sky. "Announce your trick," commanded Mr. Ledbetter through the megaphone. Ethel took the straw from her mouth and said, "I've begun to shut the woman in the ash tree and the man in the oak tree and that falling brat in the thorn tree." A whisper passed through the audience, and they looked at each other. They looked at the witch number 2 with a new respect. Imprisonment of human beings in trees is very old magic, and it is as black as night. The Druids did it, and the witches of ancient Greece and Rome. Even now, there are gaunt willows and shuddering alders from whose insiders their own spirits have fled, to be replaced, okay?
By some boastful traveler or careless shepherd who has lain there, trapped in slumber, for 1,000 years. Only Belladonna, hiding with the other witches, was unhappy.
Oh, those poor trees,
she murmured. And indeed, the trees were worth worrying about. The oak was one of those trees that are a whole world of their own. Its great scarred trunk was full of clefts and hollows in which squirrels lived, and mice and little scurrying beetles. It stood rooted in a pool of soft, green moss. Delicate acorn cups clung to its mazed branches, and its crown was a mass of autumn gold. The ash was as tall but slender, the smooth gray bark seemingly like silver against the pale blue sky, the keys hanging in bunches from its upward sweeping boughs. A younger tree than the oak, but proud and regal as a queen. And lastly, the hawthorn, a most powerful and knowing tree, with its writhing trunk, its blood-red berries clustered round the fierce black barbs. Ethel Feedbag, meanwhile, had fetched a sack from her wheelbarrow and humped it to where the Bicknells lay. It was labeled Mangelwurzel meal, but it was better not to ask what was really in the powder she now sprinkled over the bawling, slug-faced Linda, her twitching mother, and the tired body of the grocer. Whatever it was, within seconds, all 3 of them lay unconscious on the grass.
Okay.
Grinning happily, Ethel now pulled up her gown, fumbled under her skirt, and from the elastic of her brown woolen knickers drew a long black-hilted witch's knife. And as she did so, Ariman gasped and turned a chalky white. He had seen clear as daylight the dreaded willies beneath the gown. For a moment, it looked as though the great magician would cut and run, but the ogre and the secretary had already closed ranks behind him, and with a groan he sat back in his seat. Ethel, meanwhile, was smearing the bark of the thorn tree with a slimy, blood-colored paste. Then she picked up her knife and made a single long slit in its side. "Oh, Terence, I can't bear it," whispered Belladonna. "I don't suppose it feels any pain, Belladonna. I expect that's what the ointment was for, to stop it hurting." They watched breathlessly as the slit of its own accord grew wider, and became at last a gaping hole that led to the tree's very heart. "Not bad," said Ariman, struggling to be fair, "though I prefer lightning myself, neater." Ethel grunted, whacked her pig, and came back to stand with her knife poised over Linda. "Is she going to kill her?" asked Terence hopefully. but Ethel was crouching over Linda, murmuring,
a spell in a language so ancient and peculiar that none of them could make out a word. Over and over she chanted, and then slowly the fat, nasty little schoolgirl rose from the grass, stuck her hands out in front of her, and began to sleepwalk, like a bewitched suet, putting toward the tree. In, ordered Ethel, putting a boot in Linda's bottom. And lo and behold, Linda wobbled forward into the thorn tree, and the sides of the tree came together, closer, closer, and the slit vanished, and she was gone. Next, Ethel went over to the ash. Again, she rubbed the tree with ointment. Again, she made a slit in the side, and again the slit withered to show the dark center of the tree. And now it was Mrs. Beckner who rose and walked in a trance into the tree, and the tree closed around her, and she was gone. Ethel was just going to start the oak when there was an extremely angry rustling noise which began at the hawthorn tree and moved over to where Ethel stood.
You don't knock on people's door like that. That is disrespectful.
A second, even angrier rustle followed. What these were the spirits of the thorn and the ash, and they were in their very nasty temper indeed. It is not at all convenient for me to be out this morning, said the spirit of the ash. You might have asked, said the spirit of the thorn.
Okay.
Cannot actually see tree spirits. They are simply a rustle. But one knows that if one could, they would be green, female, and easily upset. Didn't ask you to shift, said Ethel. Plenty of room for everybody. Stay in with the repulsive child, the spirit of the thorn. You must be joking. I'm going home to Mother. And he rustled off in the direction of the old hawthorn standing on the hill, followed by the spirit of the ash, still yammering with indignation. Ethel shrugged. It took more than a couple of rustles to upset a feed bag. She had made a slit in the oak tree now, and stood back as it opened, groaning and creaking, and sending the squirrels and dormice scampering away in terror. Then Ethel went to fetch Mr. Bicknell, and he too got up and walked into the tree. The tree closed over him, and he was gone. The judges, going over to have a closer look, were pleased. True, the thorn tree buckled at the bottom because the fatness of Linda's thighs. Its bark had come out in bumpy knots like boils. The golden leaves of the ash, too, were shriveling fast. Still, no passerby could possibly have guessed that 3 frantic, tortured human beings were imprisoned in that peaceful dell.
But of course, there was no question of giving out marks just yet. A true witch must be able to loosen an enchantment as well as weep it. Undo the spell, ordered Ariman. Ethel had slumped down beside her pig. Now she got up and waddled over to the thorn. Again she made a slit in the tree. Again the slit widened, and out of the grass like a crumbled mess rolled Brenda Bignall. Next, Ethel slit open the ash, and the lovely tree seemed to sigh with relief as Mrs. Bignall, sticky with sap and minus 3 of her furrows, fell out onto the turf. Smirking now, Ethel went over to the oak. Again she slit it. Again she stood back and waited. Nothing happened. Ordered Ethel, jerking her head. Still nothing. Beneath the mask, Ethel's round face flushed with tempers. She said, stamping her foot. Silence! Then from the depths of the great tree, a quiet voice said, "No." Ethel's face darkened to beetroot. "It's over," she hissed. "You come out now!" But inside the oak tree, the tired grocer did not stir. What did come out of the tree was its spirit. Okay?
The spirits of the ash and of the thorn. The spirit of the oak was simply a Russell, but an older and a wiser one. "Leave him be," it said to Ethel Feedbag. "He wants to stay. He likes it in there. Says he'll come out when his wife's 90 and in the wheelchair and cannot nag, and his daughter's left home for good."
Stay in the tree!
Roared Ethel, angry as a bull. "That's right," rustled the spirit. "Says he's never been so happy in his life. He's no bother to me. He just wants to sleep most of the time. His wife used to snore and kick him round the bed. You know how some women do. I don't mind him. He's company, and you can see he doesn't mind." This was true. Unlike the thorn which had come out in boils, or the ash whose leaves had shriveled, the great oak tree stood calm and undisturbed by the grocer in his depths. "Just do us up again, dear," ordered the spirit. "It's getting drafty. He'll be all right in there for 50 years or so. I'll see he doesn't go moldy. Then someone can let him out, and the poor bloke can lead a decent life." So Ethel closed the tree up again. What else could she do? But when Linda and her mother had been sent back to Acacia Avenue, and Ethel's marks came through, they were low. 4 out of 10, the same as Mabel's. What else could one expect? There is nothing
Okay.
Black about shutting someone into a tree who simply loves it there. But if Ethel was furious, Ariman was as happy as a lark. Whatever else happened, he wouldn't have to marry the witch with the wellies. All through supper, he laughed and joked until he went upstairs, heard the steady drip drip of water, and found that the Kraken had climbed onto his bed.
Dun, dun, dun. And we're going to stop right there.
Woohoo!
All
Huzzah!
All right. Woo!
See, I was really hoping that the father, I thought the opposite was going to happen. I thought
That
that
he
the
would get
mother and
soft?
daughter were going to get stuck in the tree and he was going to get to live his life. But I kind of like this way so much
Yes.
better.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
this is
because
so
he
much more
wants
Hear him
poetic.
peace.
die and go away and he gets like live
Yes.
life.
Yeah.
I like that better.
Okay, so I thought you were talking about the Kraken, but yes, I love that what you said. Yeah, so he got stuck in the tree and he wanted to stay in the tree. I'm
Yeah.
assuming
Yeah.